I'm Jessica Martinez, 31, and the house I scraped together every penny to buy just became ground zero for the biggest family showdown of my life. Picture this. I'm sitting in my childhood kitchen, sipping lukewarm coffee from my mom's favorite ceramic mug, when she drops the bomb like she's discussing tomorrow's weather forecast. Marcus is going to stay at your place for a while, Mija. Just until he gets back on his feet. The casual way she said it, like my three-bedroom home in Austin's trendy East Side with some kind of family crash pad, made my stomach drop faster than the Texas Rangers in the playoffs. Before I tell you how I handled this family power play that would make even the boldest reality TV producer jealous, smash that like button if you've ever had relatives who think your personal space comes with an all-access family pass, and drop a comment letting me know what state you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to need to buckle up for this ride. Growing up as the middle child in a Mexican-American household meant navigating expectations that shifted like Austin traffic patterns, unpredictable and often frustrating. My parents, Rosa and Miguel Martinez, immigrated from Guadalajara in the 80s with nothing but determination and a dream of building something better for their kids. They succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, establishing a successful landscaping business that now employs half our extended family. But somewhere along the way, their protective instincts morphed into a control system that treated their adult children like pieces on a chessboard they could move around at will. My older sister, Carmen, was the golden child who could do no wrong. She married her college sweetheart right after graduation, popped out 2 perfect grandchildren, and settled into suburban bliss exactly 4 miles from our parents' house. Every Sunday, she'd arrive at family dinner with homemade tres leches cake and stories about little Diego's soccer achievements and Sophia's piano recitals. Carmen's life was the template our parents expected us all to follow: early marriage, nearby residence, and regular production of grandchildren to spoil. My younger brother, Marcus, was the eternal baby of the family, now 28 but still treated like he was finishing high school. Every failed business venture, every broken relationship, every bad financial decision was met with open arms and an open wallet from our parents. When his food truck business collapsed last year, something about unpaid taxes and a partnership that went south, Mom and Dad bailed him out without question. When his girlfriend kicked him out of their shared apartment 3 months ago, he moved back into his childhood bedroom like it was the most natural thing in the world. Me. I was the anomaly. The one who chose career over marriage, independence over proximity, personal goals over family expectations. After graduating from UT with a degree in marketing, I spent 5 years grinding in corporate America, saving every dollar I could while living in a cramped apartment with 2 roommates who thought cleaning meant spraying Febreze on everything. My parents couldn't understand why I'd choose to struggle alone when I could live comfortably at home. Why I'd work late nights and weekends when I could be dating nice Mexican boys they'd handpicked from church. When I finally saved enough for a down payment on my dream house, a 1920s bungalow with original hardwood floors, and a kitchen that belonged in better homes and gardens, my parents' reaction was lukewarm at best. "It's very nice, Mija," my mother had said, walking through the empty rooms with the same enthusiasm she'd show for a root canal. "But it's so big for just one person, and so far from family." That house wasn't just an address to me. It was proof that their sacrifices had paid off, that the American dream they'd chased across borders was alive and well in their daughter's success. Every mortgage payment, every carefully chosen piece of furniture, every weekend spent painting walls and planting flowers in the front yard, represented my independence from a family dynamic that sometimes felt more suffocating than supportive. The monthly Sunday dinners were my compromise with tradition, a way to stay connected without sacrificing my hard-won autonomy. Little did I know that this particular October afternoon would test every boundary I'd spent years establishing, forcing me to choose between family loyalty and self-respect in a way I'd never imagined possible. The smell of my mom's famous pozole filled the kitchen as I arrived exactly 15 minutes late. My small act of rebellion that reminded everyone I was an adult with my own schedule. Dad was in his usual spot at the head of the table, already diving into the sports section of the Austin American Statesman while providing running commentary on the Cowboys, latest disappointing performance. Carmen was arranging fresh flowers she'd brought from her garden. Her children coloring quietly at the breakfast bar, with the kind of perfect behavior that made me question whether kids actually came with mute buttons. Marcus sprawled across the living room couch, like he'd been there for years instead of months, his Xbox controller in hand and his attention split between Call of Duty and whatever Netflix series he was binge-watching. At 28, he had the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to worry about where his next meal or rent payment would come from. His thick black hair was perfectly styled, even for a lazy Sunday, and his designer sneakers, gifts from our parents, probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments. "How's work going, Jess?" Carmen asked as we settled around the dinner table, her tone carrying that particular mix of genuine interest and subtle condescension that older siblings master. She knew my job at a tech startup meant long hours and uncertain equity payouts, a far cry from her husband's stable engineering position at Dell. "Actually really good," I replied, ladling Pozole into my bowl. "We just landed a major client, and I'm leading the campaign launch. Could mean a significant bonus if everything goes well." My father looked up from his newspaper long enough to nod approvingly. In his world, hard work always paid off eventually, even if the path wasn't one he'd have chosen for his daughter. My mother, however, was already mentally calculating how this career success might translate into marriage prospects. "That's wonderful, Mija. You know, Mrs. Gonzalez from church has a nephew who works in technology too. Very handsome, very successful. I could arrange." "Mom," I interrupted gently, a practice deflection I'd perfected over the years. "I'm really focused on work right now." The conversation might have continued down this familiar path, career achievements, minimized in favor of relationship potential, but Marcus chose that moment to pause his game and join us at the table. His arrival shifted the family dynamic instantly, our parents' attention gravitating toward their youngest like plants turning toward sunlight. "How are you feeling, Mijo?" Mom asked, her voice dropping into the worried tone she reserved for Marcus's various life crises. "You seemed stressed yesterday when we talked." Marcus sighed dramatically, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized from childhood. It was his signature move when preparing to deliver news that would require parental intervention and financial support. "Things are just complicated right now," he began, his voice carrying the weight of manufactured vulnerability. "Living back home at my age is messing with my head, you know. And I'm trying to get this new business idea off the ground, but it's hard to focus here with all the family energy." I watched our parents' faces transform with concern and determination. In their minds, Marcus wasn't a nearly 30-year-old man who'd made a series of poor choices. He was their baby who needed protection and support to realize his potential. "What kind of business?" Dad asked, leaning forward with interest. "Social media consulting for small businesses. I've already got some potential clients lined up, but I need space to work, to take meetings, to really focus on building something solid this time." The setup was so obvious I almost admired its simplicity. Marcus had learned over the years exactly which buttons to push to activate our parents' problem-solving instincts. Independence, entrepreneurship, getting back on his feet, all the right buzzwords, delivered with just enough vulnerability to inspire action. That's when Mom dropped her bombshell with the casual confidence of someone who'd never considered that her decision might be questioned. "Well, that's perfect timing then," she said, smiling like she just solved world hunger. "Marcus can stay at Jessica's house while he builds his business. She's got that extra bedroom she's not using, and it's in a great neighborhood for young professionals." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not a request, not a suggestion, a decision made without my input about my home, my space, my life. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest that accompanied moments when my family's love felt more like control, when their solutions required my sacrifice without my consent. Carmen looked between us with the kind of interested concern she'd show for a mildly entertaining telenovela plot twist. Dad nodded approvingly, already moving on to logistics in his practical way. Marcus, for his part, had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, though whether from embarrassment or excitement was impossible to tell. "I actually use that room as my home office," I said carefully, each word measured and deliberate. I've got client calls, project materials, my whole workspace set up there. Mom waved away my concern like she was swatting a fly. You can work at the kitchen table, Mija. Or get one of those laptop desks for the living room. Marcus needs proper space for his business meetings. The casual dismissal of my professional needs in favor of Marcus's theoretical business venture was so characteristic of our family dynamic that I almost laughed despite my rising anger. My established career, my mortgage payments, my actual success, all of it secondary to Marcus's latest attempt to find himself. It makes perfect sense, Dad added, warming to the idea. Family helps family. Marcus gets the space he needs, Jessica gets some help with that big house, everyone wins. I looked around the table at my family's satisfied faces, realizing they'd already mentally moved Marcus into my guest room. Carmen was probably planning a housewarming party. Mom was likely calculating how this arrangement might finally force me to settle down. After all, with a housemate, I'd need to be more social, more open to meeting people. The moment crystallized everything wrong with our family dynamic, the assumption of my compliance, the prioritization of Marcus's wants over my needs, the complete lack of consideration for my autonomy as an adult homeowner. I recognized the familiar crossroads, speak up, and face the united disappointment of my family, or smile and nod while my carefully constructed independence crumbled under their expectations. But this time, something was different. Maybe it was the mortgage payment I'd struggled to make for 2 years. Maybe it was the memory of all those evenings I'd spent alone in my beautiful house, grateful for the peace and space I'd worked so hard to create. Or maybe it was just the final straw in a lifetime of being expected to accommodate everyone else's needs while my own went unnoticed. I'll need to think about it, I said neutrally, neither agreeing nor refusing outright. The response clearly wasn't what they'd expected. Mom's eyebrows rose slightly. Dad frowned over his newspaper. Carmen looked genuinely surprised that I hadn't immediately fallen in line with the family plan. What's to think about? Marcus asked, speaking directly to me for the first time since the announcement. It would just be temporary, until I get established. And I'd help out around the house. Maybe contribute something toward utilities. The offer was generous by Marcus's standards, but it missed the fundamental point. This wasn't about money or household chores. This was about my right to make decisions about my own living space, about the boundaries I'd spent years establishing, being respected rather than bulldozed. I just need to check a few things, I repeated, keeping my voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. You know, lease considerations, homeowner's insurance, that kind of stuff. It wasn't entirely true. I owned my house outright, and could legally have anyone I wanted stay there, but it bought me time to formulate a real response. More importantly, it introduced the novel concept that my decision-making process might involve factors beyond family obligation. The conversation shifted after that, moving on to Carmen's kids, upcoming school performances, and Dad's plans for expanding the landscaping business. But I could feel the undercurrent of expectation, the assumption that my thinking about it was just a formality before inevitable compliance. As I helped clear dishes after dinner, nodding along to Mom's suggestions about which of Marcus's furniture might fit best in my guest room, I realized I'd reached a point where acquiescence was no longer an option I could live with. The drive home had never felt so loaded with possibility and dread, my car becoming the transitional space where the dutiful daughter began transforming into a woman finally ready to fight for her boundaries. Sitting in my driveway, looking at the house I'd worked so hard to make my own, I whispered to my reflection in the rearview mirror, "Not this time." The words surprised me with their certainty, setting in motion a chain of events that would either strengthen my family relationships or force me to redefine what family loyalty really meant. That Sunday night marked the beginning of what I now call Operation Boundary Defense, the most carefully planned week of my adult life. As I sat in my home office, surrounded by the marketing campaigns and client presentations that my family so casually wanted to relocate to my kitchen table, I felt a clarity I'd never experienced before. This wasn't just about Marcus crashing at my place. This was about whether I'd spend the rest of my life being treated like a supporting character in everyone else's story. The first thing I did was call my best friend, Ashley, who'd witnessed years of my family's well-intentioned bulldozing. They did what? She practically shouted through the phone after I explained the situation. "Girl, please tell me you're not actually considering this." "I'm not," I said, surprising myself with how definitive I sounded. "But I need to handle this smart, not just emotional. You know how my family operates. If I go in guns blazing, they'll circle the wagons and make me the villain who's abandoning family values." Ashley, who worked in crisis management for a PR firm, immediately switched into strategic mode. "Okay, so we need facts, not feelings. What are your actual legal protections here?" That question launched me into a deep dive of homeowners' rights that lasted until 2 a.m. I discovered that even though I owned my house outright, having a long-term house agast could affect everything from my homeowner's insurance to my property taxes. More importantly, I learned that in Texas, anyone staying more than 30 days could establish tenants' rights, making it legally complicated to remove them even from your own home. Armed with this information, I crafted my strategy. Instead of a direct confrontation that would paint me as the heartless sister, I'd let practical realities and legal requirements do the heavy lifting. Monday morning started with a call to my insurance agent. "Hi, this is Jessica Martinez. I need to understand what happens to my homeowner's policy if I have a long-term house guest." The conversation was more illuminating than I'd expected. Any resident over 30 days needed to be added to the policy. If Marcus had any accidents or caused damage, it could affect my coverage and rates. If he received mail at my address or changed his driver's license, he'd legally be considered a tenant with rights I couldn't simply ignore. "Most people don't realize," my agent explained, "that letting families stay temporarily can create lasting legal complications. I always recommend formal agreements, even between relatives." Next, I called my accountant about tax implications. Since I occasionally worked from home and claimed part of my house as a business expense, having a non-business resident could complicate my deductions. The conversation gave me more ammunition for my growing case. By Tuesday, I'd compiled a comprehensive list of legal, financial, and practical concerns that made Marcus's proposed arrangement far more complicated than my family had assumed. But I wasn't ready to play my hand yet. Marcus had started texting me directly, apparently prompted by our parents' impatience with my thinking it over response. His messages revealed a lot about his expectations. "Hey sis, been looking at your neighborhood online. Super cool area. When should I come check out the room? Mom says you're worried about some paperwork stuff. I'm sure we can figure it out. I'm pretty low maintenance." Thinking I could set up my office space in that front room with all the windows. Perfect lighting for video calls with clients. The casual way he was already redesigning my living space confirmed that my family had presented this as a done deal rather than a request. More concerning was his assumption that he'd take over my front parlor, the room where I did my own client video calls, and had spent months creating the perfect professional backdrop. Wednesday brought escalation from Mom. She called during my lunch break, her voice carrying that particular mix of excitement and expectation that meant she'd been planning. "Mija, I've been thinking about Marcus's move. We could help him this weekend. Your father has the truck available, and Carmen said she and the kids could help with the heavy lifting. Make it a family project." The image of my entire family descending on my house with Marcus's belongings, treating my home like a storage unit, sent a shot of adrenaline through my system. This was happening faster than I'd anticipated. "Mom, I'm still working through some of the legal stuff," I said, stalling for time. "There are more complications than I initially realized." "Legal stuff." Her tone shifted to concern. "What kind of legal stuff?" "It's just family helping family." "Well, insurance considerations, tax implications, tenant rights laws in Texas. Turns out having someone stay long-term isn't as simple as it sounds." The pause on the other end told me she hadn't considered any of these factors. In her mind, family arrangements existed outside the realm of legal complications. "I'm sure those things don't apply to family, Mija. You're overthinking this." That evening, I made the call that would change everything. My friend Jake from college worked as a paralegal and had mentioned once that he was looking for a temporary place to stay while his apartment underwent major renovations. When I explained my situation, carefully framed as needing a responsible house sitter while I traveled for work, He was immediately interested. "I've been staying in hotels for 2 weeks," he said. "A proper house would be amazing. And I can pay fair market rate for a short-term rental." We arranged to meet Thursday after work to discuss terms. Jake was everything Marcus wasn't: financially stable, professionally established, and refreshingly straightforward about expectations and boundaries. More importantly, he was unknown to my family, making him the perfect obstacle to their plans. Thursday's family communications revealed their growing impatience with my delays. Dad sent a text that was pure Miguel Martinez direct and brooking no argument. "Jessica, your mother is worried about this delay. Marcus needs to know his move in date so he can plan accordingly. Let's resolve this by Friday." The commanding tone, so familiar from childhood, would have sent me scrambling to comply just months earlier. Instead, it strengthened my resolve. I was 31 years old, a homeowner, a successful professional, and I would not be given ultimatums about my own living space. Carmen's approach was more subtle but equally manipulative. She called Thursday evening under the guise of sisterly concern. "Hey Jess, Mom's really stressed about this whole situation with Marcus. You know how she gets when family stuff feels unsettled. Is there something specific you're worried about? Maybe I can help work through it." Carmen had always been skilled at positioning herself as the reasonable mediator, while subtly pressuring me toward family compliance. Her suggestion that my concerns needed to be worked through, rather than respected, revealed how little she understood my position. "It's not about specific worries," I explained carefully. "It's about making a responsible decision that protects everyone involved. This isn't just letting someone crash on my couch for a weekend." "But it's Marcus," she said, as if his identity somehow negated practical considerations. "He's family, and he really needs this fresh start." The conversation continued for 20 minutes. With Carmen alternating between gentle persuasion and subtle guilt-tripping, she mentioned Marcus's fragile emotional state after his latest setbacks, reminded me of how much our parents had sacrificed for all of us, and painted my hesitation as unnecessarily cold and calculating. By the time I hung up, I felt drained, but more certain than ever that I was making the right choice. My family's inability to understand or respect my position wasn't a character flaw on my part. It was evidence of how deeply entrenched their boundary violating patterns had become. Friday morning brought my meeting with Jake, the final piece of my strategic puzzle. We toured my house, discussed terms, and signed a formal short-term rental agreement that would give him legal occupancy starting Sunday, the day before my family's planned moving party. For Marcus. As Jake handed me the first month's rent in advance, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The practical problem was solved, but the emotional confrontation with my family was still ahead. That afternoon, I booked myself a weekend retreat at a spa in the Hill Country, about 2 hours from Austin. I'd be unreachable during the exact window when my family expected to move Marcus into my house. By the time they figured out what had happened, Jake would be legally established as my tenant, and I'd be too far away for an immediate confrontation. Friday evening's family communications confirmed that Sunday's move was set in stone in their minds. Mom sent a group text with logistics, arrival time, who was bringing what, suggestions for Marcus's room setup. The casual way they discussed rearranging my furniture and deciding which of my possessions should be moved to accommodate Marcus's needs was breathtaking in its presumption. Marcus's contribution to the group chat was particularly telling. "Can't wait to get settled in my new creative space. This is exactly what I need to really focus and build something amazing." His excitement about his space in my house crystallized everything wrong with this situation. In his mind, my guest room had already become his room, my house his launching pad, my sacrifice his opportunity. As I packed for my weekend away, I felt the same mixture of nervousness and determination that had carried me through other major life decisions: college graduation, career changes, buying my house. This boundary I was drawing would either establish a new foundation for healthier family relationships, or reveal that such relationships might not be possible with people who couldn't respect my autonomy. Saturday morning, I loaded my car and headed for the hills, leaving Jake with keys, legal documentation, and instructions to be polite but firm with any unexpected visitors. My phone was going to silent mode except for emergencies, and I was finally going to find out what it felt like to put my own needs first, regardless of family expectations. The last thing I saw in my rearview mirror was my beautiful house, the symbol of everything I'd worked for, and everything I was finally ready to protect. Sunday morning in the Texas hill country dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect October day that makes you grateful to be alive. I woke up in my spa retreat room to the sound of birds and distant wind chimes, a stark contrast to what I knew was about to unfold back home in Austin. My phone, which I'd kept on airplane mode since Saturday afternoon, showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages when I finally turned it back on at 9 a.m. The progression of messages told a story that was both predictable and infuriating. Dad, 8:30 a.m., heading to your house now. See you soon. Mom, 8:45 a.m., bringing breakfast tacos for everyone. So excited for Marcus's fresh start. Carmen, 9:15 a.m., where are you? Your car isn't in the driveway. Marcus, 9:30 a.m., sis, we're here but nobody's answering. Did you oversleep? Dad, 9:45 a.m. Jessica, call immediately. There's some confusion here. Carmen, 10:00 a.m. There's a strange man in your house claiming he lives there. We're calling the police. My heart rate spiked at that last message. I immediately called Jake, who answered on the first ring with remarkable calm considering the circumstances. Hey Jessica. So I met your family, he said, and I could hear the wry smile in his voice. Interesting bunch. Oh my God, Jake, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Carmen said something about calling the police. They threatened to, but I showed them our rental agreement and explained I'm a paralegal who knows tenant rights law. That cooled things down pretty quickly. Your dad's not thrilled, but he's not stupid either. He knows I'm here legally. I could hear raised voices in the background, my mother's distinctive rapid, fire Spanish mixed with my father's deeper, more controlled anger. Where are they now? I asked. Your parents are in their truck having what sounds like a heated discussion. Your brother's pacing around your front yard, looking like someone canceled Christmas. And your sister's been taking pictures of your house like she's documenting a crime scene. The absurdity of the situation would have been funny if it weren't so perfectly emblematic of my family's approach to problems they couldn't control. When their assumptions collided with reality, their first instinct was to find someone to blame rather than examine their own behavior. Jake, I can't thank you enough for handling this. I know it's not what you signed up for. Actually, it's exactly what I signed up for, he replied. You were honest about needing someone to hold down the fort while you dealt with family drama. This is me holding down the fort. As we talked, my phone lit up with an incoming call from Mom. I let it go to voicemail, then another from Carmen, then Dad. The barrage continued until I finally answered Marcus's call on the 5th ring. Jess. What the hell is going on? His voice carried a mixture of confusion and indignation that would have been comical if it weren't so revealing. There's some random guy in your house saying he lives there now. This is insane. His name is Jake, and he's my tenant, I said calmly. I told everyone I needed to think about the arrangement, and this is what I decided. Your tenant. Since when do you have a tenant? And what about our agreement? We never had an agreement, Marcus. Mom and Dad made an announcement, and I said I'd think about it. This is my answer. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice had shifted from confusion to hurt. I don't understand. I thought we were family. I thought you'd want to help me get my life together. The guilt hit me like a physical blow, that familiar manipulation wrapped in genuine pain that my family wielded so effectively. But I'd spent enough time in therapy to recognize the pattern. I do want to help you succeed, Marcus. But helping doesn't mean automatically saying yes to arrangements that affect my home and my life without any discussion. But it's just temporary. That's what you said about the food truck loan, and moving back in with Mom and Dad, and the business partnership that was going to change everything. When does temporary actually end, Marcus? Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more honest than I'd heard in years. I really needed this, Jess. I can't keep living in my childhood bedroom like I'm 16 again. It's killing me. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt genuine sympathy for my brother. But sympathy didn't negate my right to make decisions about my own space. I understand that, and I'm sorry you're struggling. But the solution isn't to take over my house without asking. It's to make a real plan for independence that doesn't depend on other people sacrificing for you. The conversation ended shortly after that, with Marcus promising to talk to Mom and Dad about all this, which I translated as, help them strategize a way to change your mind. 20 minutes later, my phone rang with a call from Mom, and I knew the real confrontation was about to begin. Misha, she started, her voice carrying that dangerous calm that preceded her most emotional outbursts. We need to talk. This situation is unacceptable. I agree, I said, catching her off guard. Making decisions about my house without consulting me first was completely unacceptable. Don't you dare turn this around. We were trying to help both of our children, and you've made some stranger more important than your own brother. The accusation stung, because it contained just enough distorted truth to hook into my guilt. I had prioritized a relative stranger's needs over my family's expectations, but framing it that way ignored the fundamental issue of consent and respect. Mom, I didn't make Jake more important than Marcus. I made my own decision, making authority more important than your assumptions about what I'd agree to. This is what your independence has done to you, she continued, her voice rising. You've become selfish and cold. Family doesn't treat family this way. You're right that family doesn't treat family this way. Family doesn't make major decisions about each other's lives without discussion. Family doesn't assume compliance instead of asking for consent. The conversation spiraled from there, with Mom cycling through every guilt-inducing argument in her considerable arsenal. I was abandoning family values. I was betraying the sacrifices she and Dad had made. I was setting a terrible example for Carmen's children. I was hurting Marcus when he was already vulnerable. Each accusation felt like a knife twist, designed to activate the people-pleasing daughter who'd spent decades prioritizing family harmony over personal boundaries. But something had shifted in me during this week of strategic planning. I could feel the guilt and pain of her words without being controlled by them. I love you, Mom, and I love this family. But love doesn't mean automatic agreement, and helping doesn't mean sacrificing my autonomy every time someone needs something. Your autonomy. The word came out like a curse. What about family loyalty? What about the values we raised you with? The values you raised me with include working hard, being responsible, and respecting other people's property and decisions. I'm living those values by protecting the home I worked for, and refusing to let anyone, even family, make major decisions about my life without my input. By the time we hung up, both of us were emotionally drained and no closer to understanding each other's position. But I felt something I'd rarely experienced after family conflicts: pride in standing my ground instead of shame for disappointing them. The rest of Sunday brought a stream of texts and calls from various family members, each trying a different angle of persuasion. Carmen emphasized Marcus's emotional fragility. Dad focused on practical solutions that still ended with Marcus in my house. My tia Rosa called to remind me of family obligations and the importance of supporting struggling relatives. Through it all, Jake remained my steady anchor at the house, politely deflecting increasingly creative attempts to access the property. When my parents returned Sunday evening with Marcus and Uncle Steve's pickup truck, apparently planning to move regardless of the morning's complications, Jake met them in the driveway with quiet professionalism. I understand this is a difficult situation for your family, he told my father, according to his later account. But I have a legal rental agreement and tenants' rights. I'm not looking for conflict, but I also can't allow unauthorized access to the property I'm renting. Dad, faced with someone who understood the law and couldn't be guilted into compliance, finally accepted that their original plan was impossible. The truck returned to Uncle Steve's without unloading a single box. Monday morning brought a shift in tactics. Instead of emotional appeals or practical logistics, my family went nuclear. They questioned my mental health, suggested I was having some kind of breakdown, and hinted that maybe I needed professional help to understand why I was sabotaging family relationships. The irony wasn't lost on me. In their minds, setting boundaries was evidence of instability, while their assumption that they could reorganize my life without my consent was perfectly reasonable family behavior. But Monday also brought something unexpected: a text from my youngest cousin, Sophia, who was finishing her senior year at UT. "Hey cuz, heard about the family drama. Don't let them guilt trip you. What you did took guts, and honestly, it's about time someone stood up to the family bulldozer. Proud of you." Her message was the first validation I'd received from anyone in my extended family, and it reminded me that not everyone shared my parents' perspective on family dynamics and individual rights. Tuesday brought the call I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Dad requesting a family meeting to resolve this situation once and for all. His tone was formal, businesslike, the voice he used for difficult negotiations in his landscaping business. "We need to sit down like adults and work this out," he said. "This conflict is tearing the family apart." I agreed to meet them Wednesday evening at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant in South Austin, where raised voices would be socially discouraged and emotional manipulation would be harder to deploy. As I hung up the phone, I realized this confrontation had already changed me in ways I was just beginning to understand. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't approaching a family conflict with the primary goal of restoring harmony through my compliance. Instead, I was preparing to fight for a new kind of relationship with my family, one based on mutual respect, rather than assumed sacrifice. The meeting would either mark the beginning of healthier family dynamics, or force me to accept that some relationships might not survive the establishment of appropriate boundaries. Either way, I was walking into that restaurant as the full owner of my choices and the full protector of my space. The little girl who'd always said yes to keep the peace was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to participate in patterns that diminish everyone involved. Wednesday evening arrived with the kind of autumn chill that makes Austin feel almost like a real fall city instead of an extended summer. I chose my outfit carefully for the family meeting, professional but not intimidating, approachable but not apologetic. The drive to Surt, the South Austin restaurant I'd selected for its intimate atmosphere and excellent acoustics that would discourage shouting, felt like preparation for the most important presentation of my career. I arrived 15 minutes early, requesting a corner table with good sight lines and enough privacy for a difficult conversation. As I sipped a glass of mezcal and reviewed the key points I'd prepared, I felt surprisingly calm. The past 3 days had crystallized something important. I was no longer afraid of my family's disappointment because I'd finally learned the difference between disappointing them and betraying myself. Mom and Dad arrived first, both looking more formal than usual. Dad wore his good button-down shirt reserved for important business meetings, while Mom had chosen the navy dress she wore to church on special occasions. Their serious attire told me they viewed this as a significant negotiation rather than a casual family discussion. Carmen arrived moments later with an apologetic smile, immediately moving to hug me as if physical affection could bridge the emotional distance that had opened between us. "I'm so glad we're finally sitting down to work this out," she said, her tone carrying that familiar mix of warmth and subtle pressure that positioned her as the family peacemaker. Marcus was the last to arrive, 10 minutes late and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. His usual confident swagger was replaced by something more subdued, almost vulnerable. When he sat down, he avoided eye contact with everyone, focusing instead on the menu with unusual intensity. The first few minutes passed in awkward small talk about the restaurant, the weather, Carmen's kids' school activities. But eventually, Dad cleared his throat and assumed his role as family patriarch and chief negotiator. "Well, Jessica, we're here because this situation has gotten out of hand. Your mother and I have been married for 32 years, and we've never had family conflict like this. We need to find a solution that works for everyone." His framing was predictable. The conflict was something that had gotten out of hand, rather than something that had revealed existing problems. The solution needed to work for everyone, which in family code meant I needed to find a way to accommodate everyone else's needs while sacrificing my own. "I agree that we need to address this," I replied carefully. "But I think we need to start by acknowledging what actually happened here. This conflict didn't start with my decision to rent my guest room. It started when a major decision about my living space was made without consulting me." Mom shifted uncomfortably in her seat. We weren't trying to exclude you, Misha. We were trying to solve a problem quickly, and we knew you'd want to help your brother. But that's exactly the issue, Mom. You assumed my agreement instead of asking for it. You treated my home as family property instead of my personal space. Dad leaned forward, his business negotiation instincts kicking in. Let's focus on solutions rather than blame. Marcus still needs a place to stay, and you have a spare room. Surely we can work out an arrangement that addresses everyone's concerns. The persistent assumption that the end result would still be Marcus in my house revealed how little they understood my position. They viewed my boundary setting as a negotiating tactic rather than a firm decision based on principle. Actually, Dad, I've already worked out an arrangement that addresses my concerns. Jake is renting my guest room for the next 3 months while his apartment is renovated. The room isn't available. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken implications. Carmen was the first to break it, her voice carrying a note of genuine confusion. But Jake is a stranger, Jess. Marcus is family. Doesn't that mean something? Her question cut to the heart of the fundamental disagreement we'd been dancing around. In their minds, family relationship automatically trumped all other considerations, legal, financial, personal, or practical. My decision to prioritize my own autonomy over family convenience was literally incomprehensible to them. It means everything, I said quietly, which is why I'm fighting for a healthier relationship with all of you. Family doesn't mean automatic access to each other's homes, lives, or decisions. It means respecting each other enough to ask instead of assume. Marcus finally looked up from his menu, his expression a mixture of hurt and something that might have been understanding. So you're saying you don't want to help me? The question was loaded with the kind of emotional manipulation that had worked on me for decades. But I'd spent the past week learning to separate my desire to help from my obligation to sacrifice. I'm saying I want to help you in ways that don't require me to give up my autonomy. If you'd called me directly and asked if you could stay at my place, we could have discussed terms, timelines, and boundaries. We could have worked out something that respected both of our needs. But would you have said yes? He pressed. I considered the question honestly. I don't know. Maybe. But that's not the point. The point is that you deserve to ask and I deserve to answer, rather than having the decision made for both of us. Dad's patience was clearly thinning. This is ridiculous, Jessica. We're talking about family helping family, not some business transaction with contracts and negotiations. Why can't it be both? I asked. Why can't family relationships include respect for boundaries and clear communication? Why does helping have to mean sacrificing? The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, his stern negotiator facade cracked, revealing something more vulnerable underneath. Because that's not how family works, Mom said, her voice carrying the weight of generational experience. When your father and I came to this country, we survived because family meant everything. We shared everything: money, homes, responsibilities. We didn't have the luxury of individual boundaries. Her words hit me with unexpected force. For the first time, I understood that their boundary crossing wasn't just about control or convenience. It was rooted in survival strategies that had served them well in very different circumstances. I understand that, Mom, and I respect everything you and Dad sacrificed to build this life for us. But we're not in survival mode anymore. We have the luxury of healthy boundaries because of what you built. Using that luxury isn't a betrayal of your values, it's evidence of your success. The perspective shift seemed to resonate with Dad in a way my previous arguments hadn't. His expression softened slightly, the businessman giving way to the father who'd worked 2 jobs to send his kids to college. Maybe, he said slowly, we've been so focused on keeping the family together that we forgot you kids are adults now with your own lives to manage. The admission was small but significant. Carmen nodded thoughtfully, perhaps recognizing her own struggles with parental boundaries in her marriage. Even Marcus seemed to be processing the idea that family support didn't automatically equal family sacrifice. I don't want to be separated from this family, I continued. But I also can't continue in relationships where my needs are always secondary to everyone else's convenience. I need to know that my decisions about my own life will be respected, even when they're not what you would choose. Mom reached across the table. Not to grab my hand, but to place hers near mine, a gesture of connection without presumption. We love you, Mija. Sometimes our love comes out as control, because we worry about you being alone in that big house, making decisions without family input. Her honesty was disarming. I know you love me. But I need you to trust that the independence you taught me to value actually serves me well. I need you to believe that I can make good decisions about my own life. The conversation shifted after that, moving from positions to underlying needs and fears. Dad admitted that his directive approach came from decades of making quick decisions in his business, and forgetting that family required different skills. Carmen acknowledged that she'd sometimes felt caught between supporting her siblings and maintaining peace with her parents. Marcus, surprisingly, was the most insightful. I think maybe I've been hiding behind family obligation, instead of taking real responsibility for my life, he said, his voice quieter than usual. If I can't make it without someone else giving up their space for me, maybe I'm not ready to make it at all. His words sparked something that felt like hope. Marcus, that doesn't mean you have to figure everything out alone. It just means asking for help instead of assuming it, and accepting that sometimes the answer might be no. What if we tried something different? Carmen suggested. What if Marcus stayed with David, and me for a few weeks while he looks for his own place? We've got the kids' playroom that could work temporarily. The offer was generous and, more importantly, it came with full consent from everyone involved. Marcus looked genuinely grateful rather than entitled, a shift that suggested real growth might be possible. I'd like that, he said. And I'd want to contribute to household expenses and help with the kids. Make it an actual arrangement instead of just crashing somewhere. Dad nodded approvingly. What can help with first month's rent and deposit when you find a place? But this time, we'll discuss it with everyone involved before making commitments. The acknowledgement was exactly what I'd been hoping for, not perfect understanding, but genuine recognition that their previous approach had been problematic. As we prepared to leave, Mom pulled me aside. I'm sorry, Mija. We thought we were helping, but we weren't respecting you as an adult. That's not the kind of family we want to be. Her apology was simple and complete, without qualifications or excuses. Thank you for saying that, Mom. I love you, and I want us to figure out how to be family in ways that honor everyone's needs. The drive home felt different than any I'd taken after a family gathering. Instead of the usual emotional exhaustion that followed family conflict, I felt energized by the possibility of authentic relationships built on mutual respect rather than assumed obligation. Jake greeted me at the door with a smile and a cup of tea. How did it go? He asked. Better than I expected, I replied, settling onto my own couch in my own living room, appreciating the space I'd fought to protect in ways I never had before. I think we might actually be growing up as a family. The next few weeks brought subtle but significant changes in our family dynamics. Marcus moved in with Carmen and David, contributing to household expenses and helping with the kids' after-school activities. His job search took on new urgency when he realized he actually had to find his own place, rather than indefinitely depending on family accommodation. Mom started calling instead of texting when she wanted to discuss family plans, her questions framed as genuine requests rather than polite notifications. Dad's communication became more collaborative, his business style directives replaced by invitations to participate in family decisions. Most surprisingly, Carmen began setting her own boundaries with our parents, explaining that hosting Marcus had made her realize how often she'd sacrificed her family's needs to maintain peace with Mom and Dad. 3 months later, when Jake's apartment renovations were complete and he moved out, I felt ready to consider Marcus's request to rent the room himself. But this time, the conversation happened between the two of us, adult to adult, with clear terms and mutual respect for each other's needs. I've been thinking about whether I want a housemate at all, I told him honestly. I've gotten used to having my space entirely to myself. I understand, he replied, and I could hear that he genuinely did. If you decide you want to keep it private, that's completely fair. But if you're open to it, I'd like to show you that I can be a respectful housemate instead of just a family member who assumes accommodation. We worked out a trial arrangement with clear boundaries, financial contributions, and an understanding that either of us could end the arrangement with reasonable notice. 6 months later, Marcus had his own apartment and a steady income from his social media consulting business, which had actually taken off once he'd been forced to approach it, professionally rather than as a creative hobby subsidized by family support. The transformation in our family relationships wasn't dramatic or complete, but it was real. We still had moments of sliding back into old patterns, but now we had a framework for addressing problems directly rather than through guilt and assumption. More importantly, I'd learned that setting boundaries wasn't about rejecting family love, it was about insisting on the kind of love that respected everyone's autonomy and dignity. The fight to protect my guest room had really been a fight to protect my right to make decisions about my own life. And winning that fight had opened up possibilities for more authentic relationships with everyone I cared about. As I sat on my front porch one evening, watching the sun set over the Austin skyline, I reflected on how much had changed since that Sunday dinner, when my parents had casually announced their plans for my life. The house around me felt different now, not just because I'd successfully defended it, but because I'd finally learned to inhabit it as the complete owner of my choices and the full author of my story. The most valuable lesson hadn't been about property rights or family dynamics, but about the fundamental truth that healthy relationships require both love and respect, both connection and autonomy. By refusing to accept love that came with the price of my independence, I'd opened up space for the kind of love that actually strengthened everyone involved. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is teach them how to love you better. And sometimes, that teaching requires you to be willing to stand completely alone, until they learn that your boundaries aren't walls designed to keep them out, but foundations designed to support relationships that can actually last. What an incredible journey. Jessica stood her ground and actually transformed her entire family dynamic in the process. Have you ever had to teach your family how to love you better? What boundaries have you had to set to protect your peace and independence? Drop your own boundary, setting stories in the comments below. I love hearing how you've navigated these challenging family situations. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more real life stories about finding your voice and protecting your peace. Remember, setting boundaries isn't about being mean or selfish. It's about creating space for authentic relationships that honor everyone's dignity and autonomy. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to accept love that requires you to sacrifice who you are.